My father's voice boomed across the mahogany dining table, a sound I hadn't heard in person for 20 years. "You simply must hear this new commentator from the Meridian Post," he declared, raising a glass of wine. "Brilliant man, calls himself the Sentinel." My sister, Sarah, nodded enthusiastically. "Dad's right," he said. "True conviction isn't loud. It's the foundation you stand on when the world tries to shake you." I watched them through the screen of my phone, a live feed from a hidden camera in my cousin's purse. They toasted me. The Sentinel. Not Leo Vance, the son they disowned for believing those exact same words. The irony was a poison I'd been brewing into the perfect vintage. My father, Richard Vance. A man whose entire identity was built on unwavering conviction, as long as it was his own. He gestured with a steak knife, the silver glinting in the candlelight. It was the same authoritative point he'd used 2 decades ago, not with a knife, but with a trembling finger aimed at the front door. Back then, my ideas were poison. Now they were gospel he preached to his disciples. And Sarah, my adoring younger sister. She once sobbed that my beliefs would tear the family apart. Tonight, she sipped her overpriced Chardonnay and called those same beliefs refreshingly honest. Her eager nods were a desperate plea for the patriarchal approval she could never get enough of. My mother, Eleanor, offered a placid, practiced smile. She was a master of strategic silence. The same silence that had condemned me when I was 20 now served as her tacit agreement with the Sentinel. Only my cousin Chloe, my mole, knew the truth. She shifted in her seat, her gaze flickering towards the designer purse on the floor. Her discomfort was a secret handshake across the miles. The jury was all there, celebrating the ghost I'd become. This wasn't just dinner, it was a courtroom. The glint of that steak knife was a time machine. 20 years dissolved in a flash of silver. It was Thanksgiving. The air, thick with the scent of roasted turkey and simmering resentment, was about to boil over. I was 22, home from university, and armed with a new vocabulary for the injustice I'd always felt but couldn't name. The topic was a proposed wealth tax. My father, carving the bird with surgical precision, had called it theft, plain and simple. "It's not theft," I'd argued, my voice too earnest for that room. "It's a correction, a system that allows a few people to hoard generational wealth while others can't afford medicine is a broken system." Richard Vance stopped carving. He placed the knife and fork down, perfectly parallel. The silence that followed was a loaded gun. "Where are you learning this poison?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "It's not poison, Dad. It's my conviction." "Conviction?" he laughed, a short, ugly bark. "Your conviction doesn't pay the mortgage on this house. It doesn't put this food on this table." He gestured with the knife, just as he was doing now on my screen. "My conviction does." I looked to my mother. She stared intently at the floral pattern on her plate, her face a perfect porcelain mask. She wouldn't save me. She never did. Sarah began to cry, the way she always did when things got tense. "Leo, please," she whimpered, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. "You're ruining another holiday. Why do you always have to be so difficult?" Trementis difficult. That's what they called it. Believing in something they didn't. My father stood up, his shadow falling over the entire table. This family, this house, was built on a foundation of hard work and traditional values. Values you seem intent on spitting on. He pointed that trembling, authoritative finger towards the hall. "If those are your convictions, then you are not welcome at this table. You are not welcome in this house." No one spoke, not my mother, not my sister. The only sound was Sarah's quiet sobbing. I pushed my chair back and walked out. I packed a single duffel bag, and as I closed the front door behind me, the sound echoed with a finality that shook the very foundation he was so proud of. I blinked, the memory receding. On my phone, my father raised his wine glass. To the Sentinel, he boomed, a man who understands what real conviction looks like. My family, my jury, all raised their glasses in agreement. They drank to the man I had become, in the house I was no longer welcome in, and I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction. The trial was just beginning. I swiped the live feed away, plunging my DC apartment back into its usual state of quiet shadow. The silence here was different from the loaded quiet of my parents' dining room. Theirs was a silence of omission. Mine was a silence of intent. The first decade after I walked out was a testament to my father's prediction. My convictions didn't pay the rent. I worked as a line cook, a bike messenger, a graveyard shift security guard. I slept on couches and in hourly rate motels. Every hardship was a stone I used to sharpen my resolve. While they were building their wealth, I was building a fortress inside myself. I didn't write to be heard. I wrote so I wouldn't scream. I started a blog under a pseudonym, The Sentinel. It felt right. A lone watchman on the wall of a society that felt broken. I wrote about systemic injustice, about the hollow morality of the powerful, about the quiet courage of conviction. I used the same arguments that got me thrown out, but this time, they were honed by years of struggle, stripped of youthful earnestness and forged into tempered steel. An article about corporate tax loopholes went viral. Then another. The Meridian Post came calling. They didn't want Leo Vance, the kid with a chip on his shoulder. They wanted the Sentinel, the disembodied voice of reason. I was more than happy to give him to them. I buried Leo Vance and let the Sentinel rise from his ashes. Chloe found me 3 years ago, a cautious email. I know we haven't spoken, it read, but I'm going to be in DC for a conference. I'd love to see you. I never agreed with what they did. She was only a kid back then, a silent observer. Now she was a woman with a conscience. Over a quiet coffee, miles from our family's judgment, I told her everything. She became my only bridge back to a world I'd sworn off. The plan itself, the revenge, wasn't my creation. It was theirs. It began with a text from Chloe 6 months ago after one of their Sunday dinners. Chloe, you won't believe this. Dad is obsessed with some new commentator from the Meridian Post, the Sentinel. He's been quoting him all night. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled up one of my recent columns, the one Sarah had just quoted. True conviction isn't loud. I sent Chloe the link. Leo, this guy? Her reply came back instantly. Chloe, yes, that's him. Dad printed this out and has it on his desk. It's insane. He sounds so much like you used to. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. It wasn't just irony. It was a perfectly laid trap, one they had meticulously set for themselves. All I had to do was spring it. That's when I asked Chloe to plant the camera. That's when the trial truly began. I looked at the blank screen of my phone. The dinner party would be winding down. The wine was drunk. The gospel of the Sentinel preached. Now it was time for the next reading. I typed a message to Chloe. Leo, at the next dinner, when Dad brings me up, I need you to ask him one question. Just one. Dietus mine. I sent her the words. Simple, devastating, the perfect catalyst. Her reply was immediate. Chloe, are you sure? This will burn everything to the ground. I smiled in the darkness of my apartment. So's will Leo. I know, that's the point. The foundation was always rotten. 2 weeks passed. Another Sunday, another dinner. On my laptop screen, the scene was a perfect replica of the last. Same wine, same self-satisfied chatter. It was almost comforting in its predictability. My father, of course, provided the opening. The Sentinel had another column this week, Richard announced, tapping his fork against his plate for attention. On legacy, he argues that the only inheritance worth leaving is a set of unwavering principles. Sarah sighed dreamily. It's like he's speaking directly to our family values. This was it. Chloe took a slow sip of water, her knuckles white around the glass. I could almost hear her heart pounding through the cheap microphone of her phone. She cleared her throat. That's interesting, Uncle Richard, she began, her voice carefully measured. It reminds me of something, what Leo used to talk about. She paused, letting the name hang in the air like smoke. What do you think the difference is between the Sentinel's principles and the ones Leo got kicked out for? Silence. Not the loaded silence of before, but a brittle, shocked quiet. My father placed his fork and knife down with a sharp clatter. His smile was gone, replaced by a tight, dismissive sneer. "Don't be ridiculous, Chloe," he scoffed. "There is no comparison. The Sentinel writes from a place of wisdom and lived experience. He understands the world." He waved a hand dismissively. Leo was a child, an emotional, ungrateful boy spouting textbook slogans he didn't understand. He lacked respect, he lacked substance. Sarah rushed to his defense. "Exactly. Leo's words were meant to attack us, to hurt you, Dad. The Sentinel's words are about building things up, not tearing them down." They didn't see it. They couldn't. It was a cognitive dissonance, so profound it was almost a work of art. But my mother was different. She didn't speak. She simply stared at Chloe, her placid mask finally showing a crack, a flicker of something I hadn't seen in 20 years. Doubt. Watching them, I felt nothing. No rage. No satisfaction. Just a quiet, clinical confirmation. I had held out a sliver of hope that her question might spark a moment of self-reflection. Instead, they'd simply doubled down, rewriting history to protect their own narrative. They had judged the words based on the speaker, not the content. The experiment was a success, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that the only way to make them understand was to force them to. The final piece of the plan was no longer about revenge. It was about exposing a truth so undeniable it would shatter the very foundation they stood on. The feed on my laptop crackled as Chloe slipped her phone back into her purse. My father, Richard, had already pivoted, holding court about some minor business victory. Sarah was laughing, the tension from Chloe's question dissipating like steam. They had papered over the crack in their reality with terrifying speed, but my mother, Eleanor, was still staring at the space Chloe had occupied. Her wineglass was untouched. The doubt hadn't vanished. It had burrowed inward. She was the weak point. She was the one who remembered the boy I was, not just the caricature they'd invented to justify their actions. I closed the laptop. The clinical calm I felt began to solidify into a plan. Chloe's question had been a rangefinder. It proved that a private confrontation was useless. They wouldn't just deny the truth, they would pathologize the person speaking it. To them, my younger self was a disease they had cured themselves of. The Sentinel was the antidote. How could the disease and the cure be the same thing? They would never accept it in private. So I would have to make it public. Undeniably, humiliatingly public. My phone buzzed. It was Chloe. "Chloe, I'm sorry, I don't think that worked." "Chloe." "Leo, it worked perfectly. It told me exactly what I needed to know." "Chloe." "What now?" "Leo." Now, we changed the venue. From their dining room to a national stage. I walked over to my desk, the city lights illuminating a framed poster on the wall. It was for the Meridian Post's annual symposium, the Meridian Forum, a nation at a crossroads. And there, at the top of the bill, was the keynote speaker, the Sentinel. My editor, Marcus, had been pushing me for months to do a public appearance, to finally put a face to the name. I'd always refused, guarding my anonymity like a sacred text. Now, it was the only weapon that mattered. I dialed Marcus. He picked up on the second ring. "Leo, to what do I owe the late-night pleasure?" "The forum, Marcus." "I'll do it. I'll be the keynote." There was a beat of stunned silence. "You're serious? After all this time, what changed your mind?" "Let's just say I've found a story that needs a very specific ending," I said, "and I need a favor. I need front-row seats reserved for a family, the Vance family." "Vance? Any relation?" Marcus asked, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "Distant," I lied smoothly. "They're influential in their own small way. Big fans of the Sentinel. I want to make a gesture. Have your assistant send the invitation. Make it sound prestigious. An honor. But my name, Leo Vance, cannot be anywhere near it." This comes from the Meridian Post, as a tribute to pillars of the community who champion the values we espouse. The words tasted like ash, but Marcus bought it. Consider it done. This is going to be huge, Leo. The Sentinel, live and in person. We'll sell out the Lincoln Theater in an hour. We hung up, and the machinery was now in motion, a cold, intricate clockwork of my own design. I messaged Chloe, laying out the next phase. I told her an official invitation would be coming from the Post. I told her to act surprised, flattered. I told her to make sure they accepted. Chloe, a public speech? With them in the front row? Leo. This is Leo. It's the only way. Their judgment was public to me. My truth will be public to them. Chloe. They'll be destroyed. A dull mean mind. Leo. They were destroyed 20 years ago, Chloe. They just replaced the rubble with a prettier facade. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just turning on the lights. A week later, Chloe called me, her voice a hushed, conspiratorial whisper. They got it, she said. Thick, cream-colored envelope with the Meridian Post's logo in Boston gold. Dad held it like it was a holy relic. And? He read it aloud at dinner, twice. He actually teared up. They see it, Eleanor, he said to Mom. They see what we've stood for all these years. Chloe's voice was laced with a bitterness that mirrored my own. Sarah is already planning her outfit. They think they're being honored as the embodiment of the Sentinel's philosophy. The irony was no longer a poison. It was rocket fuel. They weren't just walking into a trap. They were strutting, convinced it was a throne room built in their honor. My mother's reaction was the detail I was waiting for. What about your aunt? I asked. She was quiet, Chloe said. She just watched him, the way she did the other night. Like she was trying to solve a puzzle that's been sitting in front of her for 20 years. That was it. That was everything. This wasn't just for my father, the pompous hypocrite. It wasn't for my sister, the desperate sycophant. It was for my mother. It was for that flicker of doubt in the eyes of the woman who chose silence over her own son. I was going to turn that flicker into an inferno. The night of the forum arrived faster than I expected. Standing backstage, I could hear the murmur of the sold-out crowd through the heavy curtain. I was dressed in a simple, dark suit, the uniform of Leo Vance. In my hand, I held a single index card. On it were not the soaring rhetorical points of the Sentinel, but 5 simple words. The first words I ever said that cost me everything. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. Ready to meet your public, Sentinel? I looked at my reflection in a darkened monitor. The face staring back was no longer just the ghost of the boy who was thrown out, nor the anonymous titan he had become. It was both. A fusion of pain and purpose. More than ready, I said, my voice even. They've been quoting me for months. It's time I quoted myself. Through a small gap in the curtain, I saw them. Front row, center. My father, beaming with pride. My sister, looking around as if she owned the place. And my mother, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her face a mask of anxious anticipation. She was looking for a prophet. She was about to find her son. The announcer's voice, rich with practiced gravitas, filled the theater. Ladies and gentlemen, a mind that has shaped the national discourse, the conscience of the Meridian Post, please welcome the Sentinel. The applause was a tidal wave. I walked from the wings into the blinding white light, my steps measured, my face a neutral mask. I didn't look at them. Not yet. I let the applause wash over me, a sound I'd only ever heard through speakers. I adjusted the microphone, the metallic coolness, a familiar anchor in the surreal glare. I began, my voice resonating with the deep, calm authority they knew so well. Good evening. We speak often of conviction. We praise it in our leaders, demand it in our institutions. But we mistake it for the loudest voice in the room. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the audience until it landed on the front row. On my father. He sat taller, a proprietary gleam in his eye. He nudged my sister, a silent, "See?" We speak of legacy, I continued, my eyes moving to Sarah. She was radiant, preening under the perceived glow of my words. We believe It is the wealth we accumulate, the assets we pass down. But a true legacy isn't an inheritance. It's a set of principles that can withstand the test of time and the test of comfort. Then, I looked at my mother. Her smile was a fragile, painted thing. And we speak of family values, of the bonds forged in a shared home. But the most profound statements made within a family are often unspoken. There is a silence of support, and there is a silence of condemnation. It is a dangerous thing to confuse the two. Her smile faltered. The mask cracked. Her eyes, which had been admiring a prophet, were now searching a man. She was looking at my jawline, the way I held my shoulders. I saw the flicker of doubt I'd planted weeks ago ignite into a slow, dawning dread. The puzzle was assembling itself right before her eyes. I leaned slightly into the microphone. These grand ideas, these principles we champion in forums like this, I said, my voice hardening just a fraction. They aren't born here. They are tested in far more intimate settings. They are tested, for instance, at a Thanksgiving dinner table. A ripple of confusion went through the front row. Richard's proud posture sagged. Sarah's smile vanished, replaced by a bewildered frown. I looked directly at my father. They're tested when a man, a patriarch carving a turkey with surgical precision, declares a modest proposal to help the poor as theft, plain and simple. The theater was silent now. The air crackled. Richard's face went slack, his skin suddenly pale and waxy under the stage lights. My voice changed. The polished cadence of the sentinel fell away, replaced by the raw, unvarnished tone of the son he had banished. And a young man, perhaps too earnest for that room, might reply. I held up the index card from my pocket, though I didn't need it. The words were burned into me. "It's not theft, Dad. It's a correction." A choked gasp came from the front row. It was my mother. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with horrified recognition. The puzzle was complete. I didn't stop. I turned my gaze on her. That young man might look to his mother for salvation, only to find her staring intently at the floral pattern on her plate, her silence a verdict. Her whole body flinched, as if I had physically struck her. I moved to my sister, who was shaking her head in frantic denial, whispering, "No, no, no," under her breath. He might hear his younger sister, the one he protected his whole life, start to cry, not for him, but for the holiday he was supposedly ruining, asking him why he always had to be so difficult. Finally, I returned to my father, whose face was a ruin of apoplectic rage and profound public humiliation. And that boy would be told by the man who gave him life, a man whose convictions only mattered when they were his own, that if those were his beliefs, he was no longer welcome at that table, that he was no longer welcome in that house. I let the silence hang for a beat, a heavy, suffocating blanket. My name is Leo Vance. The words landed like stones in a still pond. I saw the truth detonate in their faces. The sentinel was born in the silence you left me in, I said, my voice now calm, clinical. The trial was over. You celebrated my words only when you didn't know the man who wrote them. You lauded the conviction but exiled the son. That is the irony, and that is your legacy. I placed the single index card on the podium, a final piece of evidence left at the scene of the crime. I gave a slight, formal nod to the audience and walked off the stage. I didn't run. I didn't look back. The blinding lights gave way to the cool darkness of the wings. The sound that followed me wasn't the wave of applause I expected. It was something more profound, a dead, echoing silence. 1,000 people holding a collective breath, processing the blast wave of a truth deployed like a weapon. Then, a single, guttural sound cut through it. A sob, a raw, animal noise of grief that could only have come from one person, my mother. I didn't need to see her to know. It was the sound of a heartbreaking 20 years too late, the first honest noise she had made in my presence since I was a child. Through the narrow gap in the curtain I saw the tableau of my making. My father was frozen, his face a mottled canvas of disbelief and volcanic rage. He looked like a king who had just watched his own statue crumble into dust on his front lawn. Sarah was staring at me, her mouth agape, tears of pure, selfish horror streaming down her face. Her carefully constructed world of borrowed status hadn't just been shattered, it was revealed to be a fraud. But my mother, she had collapsed into herself. Chloe had a hand on her shoulder, not in comfort, but as if to steady a falling building. Eleanor Vance was finally, truly, seeing the son she had sacrificed on the altar of her husband's pride. Her silence had been a weapon against me for 2 decades. Now, her sound was my vindication. The audience began to stir, a low murmur that grew into whispers. They weren't just witnesses to a family drama. They had seen the core thesis of the Sentinel proven in real time. Conviction has a cost. The whispers turned into a smattering of applause, then another, building not into a roar, but into a wave of respectful, understanding acknowledgement. They weren't clapping for the spectacle, they were clapping for the truth. I met Chloe's eyes across the chaos. She gave a single, slow nod. The mission was complete. I turned away from the scene, from the wreckage I had meticulously engineered. There was no elation, no thrill of victory, just a profound, hollow quiet inside me. The weight I had carried for 20 years wasn't gone. It had simply been set down. I walked down the backstage corridor, the sound of their broken world fading behind me, leaving only the steady, even rhythm of my own footsteps on the concrete floor. The Sentinel was dead. Leo Vance could finally. So what would you do in my shoes? Would you crash one of their dinner parties just to watch the chaos unfold when you reveal who you are? Or would you just let them keep quoting you forever?